Well, my name is Milda Ališauskienė. I'm a sociologist of religion at Vytautas Magnus University, and today we are here celebrating the event, international conference co-organized by Lithuanian, Latvian and Estonian Societies for Study of Religions, together with Vytautas Magnus University. The conference is entitled Religions and Powers, and today we have guests, keynote speakers from this conference, Kathleen M from University of California in Santa Barbara, and Katarzyna Zielińska from Jagiellonian University in Poland. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having us.
Well, the topic of the conference looks challenging, and also challenging in different ways, both scholarly but also on a practical level. And I think this conference can be an opportunity for us to discuss how do these two levels interact between each other, and how science can contribute and help society to understand the reality which is in everyday life. And I would like to ask you, how would you define in general what is the role of religion in contemporary societies, and what academic scholarly explanations can be used to interpret what is going on with religion in contemporary societies?
Well, I think that one of the main points is that sociologists in the 20th century, predominantly they believed that with modernization, religion would decline. And of course, with recent events over the last 25 years, we've seen that religion never really fully disappeared, but what I had called my talk was the return of religion. That religion became a much stronger source of authority and even practicality. In a pragmatic sense, it became a source for resilience in society. And so the role of religion in society has come back into sort of the mainstream. And what I think in my area is interesting to see is the relationship of religion in electoral politics, because religion becomes used for instrumental reasons, for non-religious reasons, right? To mobilize people, to get people to vote in particular ways, to envision dichotomies so that we define our enemies, using religion as part of the attributes that define the us versus the them, the exclusionary kinds of lines that are drawn. Sometimes religion plays a role in that. And so, it's important to look at religion now because its role is both as a source of resilience for people, for believers who are taking sort of individualist stance to look for a chosen path or the straight path in their lives, and looking at religion as a moral compass. But there's also, sort of the more instrumental aspects of religion where people are using it to promote non-religious interests, their economic interests and their political interests.
I think this return of religion to the public sphere also poses a question about how to organize this kind of common life, what sort of laws should be passed, and what sort of laws should people obey. So especially in the societies which are pluralistic, as Kathy was also referring to that yesterday, I think this is particularly important, how we are able to come to the common agreement over what sort of laws, what sort of policies should be put up on us by the authorities. So this is also the important role of the scholars, I think, to kind of reflect on that. And of course, if we look at the contemporary debates in the philosophy, for example, liberal philosophy, there is Habermas, there is the writings of Jordan Rose, who are discussing where is the place of religion, and if religion should be accepted anywhere. I mean, if the politicians or the judges in the courts should use religious arguments, or if there is any space which should be kind of freed from religion. So there is a big debate around that, and I think for the role of the scholars is also to to reflect on how people, react to that, how people perceive this role of religion, how they use, as Kathy said, also religion in not only everyday interactions, but also in shaping the broader processes. So this is something which is very important. My research is on the intervention or the role of religion in shaping the evolution of biopolitical debates in Poland, and again it poses the question to what extent these policies should be shaped according to particular worldview and forced upon the people who are, for example, not Catholics. There are not that many of them in Poland, but still.
Exactly. I was thinking that you both are coming from very different social contexts. Kathy, you are coming from a very pluralistic society, diversity society, and Katarzyna, you are coming from a country which considers to be a Roman Catholic country. I think this is also what might be applied for Lithuania. And of course, this definition of religion, then, I guess, is important. Comes to this scene. And so how to define religion then? How to find, and is it in general possible to have one broad definition of religion that we all can use?
Yeah, I think it depends on what venue you're looking at for a definition, because the courts have struggled with this for a long time to have a legal definition of what counts as religion, in order to get rights and privileges that are afforded to religion in the United States by the Constitution. So that's an ongoing, fluid process, because the criteria the courts use evolve over time. But what they really rely on is the framework of Christianity, right? Because it has to be, a faith is defined by having a transcendent aspect of it, the belief in the divine, and then there have to be institutions where there's, for instance, a clerical institution, and so on. So that's a very technical approach, but there are other venues that define religion differently. So, for example, a lot of people talk about being spiritual but not religious, and that's a growing segment of American society. 90% of Americans say that they believe in God. So this is defined by more social scientific approaches that use polling data, asking this question, whether or not people believe in a God. So when 90% of Americans say they believe in God, does that mean that we're a highly religious country? That's something that's subject to intense debate by scholars, because it doesn't necessarily indicate that. It doesn't indicate church attendance. It doesn't indicate anything about doctrinal questions. It just indicates that people would rather believe that there is a God than not. And so there is a large segment, especially of younger people, who are embracing what they call spirituality and not religion. So for them, what does religion mean? That they're distancing themselves from some concept called religion, but embracing instead spirituality. So there you see a lot of definitions, a lot of meaning making going on outside of institutions, but among individuals as they choose a path that's fairly eclectic, which might draw philosophy as well as what we consider to be religion, to make that definition for them.
I agree with Kathy that of course it depends where we want to use these definitions of religion. Yeah, in social sciences, I guess there is also no agreement over what counts as a religion, but also accepting a certain definition has a very important social consequences. Yeah, because if you define something as a religion, of course it may be registered. For example, the judges or the administration accept it as a religion, then it may be certain privileges attached to that. But this is also about the social perception and how a given group functions in a society. For example, in Poland in the late 90s, when the new groups, new religions started to arrive after opening of the borders, it was very visible that whatever wasn't Catholic, it was seen with a great suspicion, and very often called a sect. This negative term was attached to indicate that these groups are not indigenous, that they are not from kind of Polish context, and they are threatening foreign, and we basically need to get rid of them. So of course the definition, if you fall into within the framework of what is called religion, then you may be socially accepted, you may be a kind of maybe tolerated, yeah. Otherwise, you may be discriminated. So there are very important social, I would say, consequences of what's counted as religion and what is excluded.
I was thinking that probably one of the interesting issues to talk when we speak about the role of religion in public and contemporary public, I think it's inevitably we are linking ourselves to the Islam, the role of Islam in Western world, and the waves of Islamophobia that we are experiencing in majority of our societies. Don't you think that once again we are kind of returning to the definition of religion and trying to say that there are good religions, there are bad religions, maybe? Can you reflect something about this? Because I think this is very also relevant to the recent discussions in European societies regarding the refugees coming from war sites to stay in our countries. So what would be your idea?
Well, as you mentioned before, the society I'm coming from is highly pluralistic. So I think that the construct of Islam, what does Islam mean, intersects with the construction of the American nation. And so when we talk about what it is to be America, many people just by definition say that Islam is outside of that, outside of the American nation. And that is because the definition of Islam has become influenced by the Clash of Civilizations thesis, where many scholars identified what's called the bloody borders of religion, and they identify that with Islam as being the violent religion. And then that has, since the 90s, really morphed and moved farther to the right, so that it's not the civilizational clash thesis any longer, but more of a thesis of Islam is not a religion but an ideology. And that's something that's embraced by the increasingly influential right wing of politics. So what it is they find to be unacceptable about Islam, the way they define Islam, is that it is a religion that never has recognized the distinction between state and religion. And so they're rejecting Islam because they see it as an unsecular faith. It's one that can't make that distinction in a way that many Americans would understand it. So that's a justification for putting Islam outside of the borders of America. And I think it plays a very important discursive role in defining what America is in the eyes of many people, especially the increasingly influential right wing of the Republican Party.
Kati, what you said about the basically Christianity, I guess, is a certain model against which the Islam is compared, because they just state that there is no distinction between secular and sacred in Islam. It's basically comparing it very much to Christianity, because there are also other religions which don't have this distinction. And I think it's basically very much Christian thing, which was kind of worked, and sociologists call it the kind of secularization of religion. So basically, if Islam secularizes, then they can fit in, if they agree for these distinctions. So this is very interesting. But the question of Islam is particularly, I think, relevant these days in Central Eastern Europe, because if you look at the maps, at the data showing the number of Muslims living in post-socialist countries, and I'm talking about Central Eastern Europe, not post-Soviet Central Asia, because this is a different case. But what's very visible that the number of Muslims living here it's completely insignificant. This is like below 1%. But the Islamophobia is growing, and the very negative reactions towards Muslims are basically constructed reactions towards what I call imagined Muslims, because they are not physically here. And of course the whole refugee crisis stirred lots of negative emotions towards and reactions towards Muslims. And I think this is also very well, I can see lots of similarities to the American case, because also in Poland and in Lithuania it is also used very much to consolidate the nation. Yeah, so we have this external threat, even if it's imagined, and not real, but anyway it helps to securitize, as you said, or consolidate the nation against the common threat. So this is something which is on the one hand of course very interesting for us as scholars to research these processes, but on the other hand it's also scary, because it shows how a certain group maybe certain notions and constructions may mobilize the very negative reactions.
I think now we can turn, Kathy, to your research, because it's really, it seems like we are now linking to that side, that your research that you presented yesterday actually shows these misinterpretations of Sharia understanding. Maybe you can tell us some few main points what really were most interesting and striking for you doing that research.
Yeah, in doing the research, it was driven initially by a turning point that happened in 2010 with the opposition to the building of the Park 51 mosque in Manhattan, and a lot of other stories that featured anti-Muslim discourse that happened in 2010 and got a lot of national attention. So including states adopting initiatives called Ban the Sharia initiatives, which at the state level would make it impossible for courts to rule on anything involving Islamic law. And so it led me to want to ask Muslims in California, what does Sharia mean? You know, because if we're legislating it out of existence, you know, how would that affect a Muslim life in California? And the main findings, after talking to over 100 Muslims over a 2-year period in semi-structured interviews around these questions about what does Sharia mean to you, I found that Muslims weren't defining it as law in the way that we think of it, as a positive law. Instead, many people were identifying Sharia as being meaningful to them as a moral compass, that it was more like a natural law, that it was an innate sense of knowing the difference between right and wrong and being able to follow that. And so it was a matter of religious self-determination for a lot of Muslims in California to be able to have the religious freedom to follow the dictates of their conscience. And you know, it becomes very problematic to say that we're going to ban the Sharia, because that means we're banning the way people choose to behave. You know, we're banning the way the dietary restrictions that Muslims might want to follow. And it's a lot like Jewish law, you know, it's a lot like halakha or following kosher. And if you could imagine trying to remove that from society, it's very analogous. So, it was an existential question. It became an existential question for a lot of people.
You also told that this research has some public role. The research results will be disseminated among public.
Right. Well, we have a website at shariarevoice.org where we had an art exhibit in Los Angeles of Muslim American art on that theme of Sharia. And so much of the art is accessible there, and we commissioned a video. So there's a spoken word video which represents some of the data, is driven by the data that we have collected, and many of the different ideas that people have about the relevance of Sharia in their daily lives. And there are excerpts of interviews there, and so that disseminates some of the research to the public, as well as, you know, ongoing publication of articles.
I don't know what for sure about Poland, but in Lithuania we have always this debate whether political level agents really are interested in social scientific research results, and whether they employ it in their work. What about United States? Is there any maybe
Well,
good practices?
Yeah, I mean, the Supreme Court just this week said in a case, the justices said in a case about gerrymandering that social scientific data is just gobbledygook, and so they're not going to look at that when they make their legal reasoning, their decisions. So there is always that ongoing tension, but I think that in terms of evaluating public policy, social science still has a very important role. You know, that politicians and lawmakers want to see what the results are of social scientific research so that they can fashion public policy in a way that's going to be more productive. And especially when we talk about religion, because there's been a gap for so many years, given that there's a very strong tradition of separation of church and state in America, and that has meant that the government doesn't collect data about religious life. And so policymakers have to rely on scholars who do this work in the academic fields to have any kind of, accurate information. And accuracy is kind of the key thing there, especially these days with the use of new media, because fake news can be disseminated so easily through Twitter, Facebook, and other social media that how do you debunk some of that once it gets out? So then you have to fall back on very deliberate and careful methodology used in social science.
I was listening once to the public lecture of Jose Casanova, and he said that in the United States, church and state are separated, though religion and politics are not. So, would you agree with him?
Touche. Yeah, a lot of voters get motivated not for their own personal economic interests, but because of something that they've heard through their at their churches or through their social gatherings that are organized around religion. Yeah, Mike Huckabee, who is the former governor of Arkansas and has run for a Republican nomination to the presidential election, has said similar things. He said, he's now behind this effort to get evangelical Christians out to vote because, they're losing control of society. In his point of view, So now it's very partisan.
So let's turn now to Europe. Back to Europe, Katarzyna. I know that you have been doing some research recently on religion and politics. Maybe you can share some.
Mostly in Poland.
Mostly in Poland.
Yes, my recent research focuses mostly, there were two parallel projects, but I was focusing mostly on the parliament, on the Polish parliament, on Sejm. It is, in a way, a kind of initiated by the writings of Habermas and the whole this debate where should be the border for the presence of religion. So I was basically interested in how religion, if religion is present in deliberations in the Sejm, which is lower chamber of the Polish parliament, and in what capacity religion is used, what sort of meanings are attached to that. So it turned out that religion is very much used as a kind of identity marker. So this is either to identify Poland against Europe, Europe against Islam, for example, but also the religious politicians against non-religious politicians. So there are this relation to the religious identification very often in debates where politicians are arguing for certain laws or policies, and they refer to their religious identity. And most recently, I'm dealing with I'm involved in a bigger project about the role of religion in the debates around biopolitics. So we are looking at how in the society, media, but also in the political discourse, again in the Polish parliament, and also in educational sphere, how these issues are justified, legitimized, what sort of discourses circulate there, and how religion is used to legitimize or delegitimize certain standpoints or certain policies. So this is something which we are doing right now, and despite our expectations that religion will be very much present in these fields, apparently it's not. it's more complicated question, I would say, because what we've noticed is basically a kind of decline in the direct use of religion. But what we also notice that the certain religious claims are articulated in a much more secular language. For example, the language of human rights. So we also notice the kind of liberal transformation or kind of use of liberal language, or as I call it also, in a way, catching and transforming the liberal language in the Polish context. And of course this is also poses the question of how we are going to understand, or how the understanding of liberalism is going to be, you know, re-articulated in a way by such inclusion of religious arguments or articulation of religious arguments in liberal language. So this is ongoing.
So you just have kind of first observations that
we did the first. We are in the middle of doing this research. So we are still analyzing data, but this is what we've already noticed. But of course there's still a long way ahead.
So coming back to Jose Casanova observation about the division between religion, church and state, and necessarily that it necessarily leads to the religion and politics division.
I
the
think
Polish case would.
I guess the Polish case would it wouldn't fit the picture of separation. You know, the constitution states that the church and state stay neutral, that they can cooperate for common good. But you know, what's in the constitution doesn't really translate into social practice. So the state is very close, and especially under current, you know, in the current political situation, you can clearly see that there is lots of kind of interactions and cooperation between church and the institutions of state. And of course, it's also at the level of politicians. They do use religion. So definitely there is no separation, I would say.
Can you maybe mention at least the main points of debates where religion and politics meet nowadays, so that you know, our audience would be.
So in the Polish context,
more aware of a practical level.
No, definitely the most recent debates, it was definitely about regulation, the legal regulation of in vitro, but also we are, for last 7 or 8 years, I think we had about 7 or 8 bills proposing the change of the existing abortion law, either liberalizing or, but also you know, making it stricter. So this will be the kind of the most important, but also refugees. I think refugees issue was because the church was very vocal in this regard and encouraging the politicians to accept the refugees in Poland. But then this particular case shows that the kind of opinions between the government or the politicians and the church is kind of departing, because the politicians are very much against, the ruling party is very much against accepting the refugees, whereas the bishops and you know, the official standpoint of the church was very much pro, or at least somehow accommodating the needs of the most needed people.
What would be main points in US for now?
What comes to my mind is the healthcare situation, the Affordable Care Act. You know, the Catholic Conference of Bishops were influential in getting provisions written into the original legislation that would exempt Catholic institutions from needing to provide coverage for reproductive health. And then, of course, there's the famous Hobby Lobby case that was decided by the Supreme Court a few years ago, which was a collection of both Protestant and Catholic institutions that sued, saying that requiring them to provide contraceptive health care was a violation of their religious freedom, because it's part of their doctrinal, their doctrine. It would force them to violate their own religious principles. And that ruling went in favor of the religious argument. And even this year, you know, there's another Supreme Court case about bakers who don't want to make cakes for weddings of same-sex couples, again saying that this is impinging on their religious freedom of expression, because a cake is a creative act. And so we'll see what the Supreme Court has to say about that. But these kinds of arguments are very much, it reminds me of what you're saying about Poland, because they are religious arguments that get filtered into the common discourse and remove a lot of the doctrinal language and theology, so that they become common sense arguments. And a lot of people who don't consider themselves to be particularly religious really these arguments resonate with them, and they get mobilized by it. So that a lot of people have a strong opinion about whether or not bakers should have the freedom to decline business from a same-sex couple. And the whole image of traditional marriage, that's now a neologism that has become popular in American vocabulary. And I think that really is saying something about the sacrament of marriage. It's gone from being a sacrament in religious language to being something that's very secularized into this concept of traditional marriage. And we know what that means now. It means a union between a man and a woman, and that it's sanctified by religious authority. But all of that it becomes blurred in the process of being passed through this filter to become part of our common discourse.
But this is, for me, it is particularly interesting because it also, how to understand this? Is it like a growing presence of religion, or is it actually a side or a proof of a kind of secularized religion? Because Peter Berger was writing about this, strategy of the churches of getting internally secularized to adjust to the demands of modernity. So the question is, if this kind of switch, this translation, as Habermas would say, is it the sign of churches actually adjusting to the or this is actually yet another way of getting more involved in the public? For me, it is
still a question, open question. Yeah, really. Well, I think we have to return now back to our conference discussions, and I will remind our listeners that we had today a nice conversation with two guest keynote speakers of our conference on religion and politics that is held these days at Vytautas Magnus University. The conference is funded by Lithuanian Research Council, and we're very thankful for them. And thank you both for this nice conversation, and see you in the conference later.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.